So how do you feel, if we make it personal, because, even in our church there are law enforcement, and in your family you've got law enforcement people.
Yeah.
So if we just make the question personal, how do you feel when you see a patrol car in your rearview mirror, or what do you think?
What does he want from me? I mean, if I'm honest, growing up, it wasn't a conversation where at my dinner table, we didn't have conversations about trusting the system or trusting police officers or things like that. It was also a common conversation of not trusting. But if something happens, you let me know, you let my mother know, you let my father, you let somebody know that can help me. It wasn't necessarily trusting the system. And the reason is because historically the system wasn't necessarily designed for African Americans. The police system we have was created shortly after slavery. And it's developed out of that system, and on through up the 60s and civil rights movement. On the other hand of the fire hose is the policeman's holding it, and the black folks are the ones getting shot for marching. It's not, they're not doing anything violent. They're getting shot with water hoses and bitten by dogs. And so you get that, and you go up through the 80s and 90s, and now the jails are overpopulated with African American men for the most part too. So growing up as an African American male in my family, with 3 younger sisters, I always knew that there was a pressure, and as a male I had to just kind of be, I'd say, twice as good, if that makes sense, or twice to measure up to a majority culture or my white brother who was on the other side. So I kind of knew that. Now that didn't necessarily define me, and it doesn't define me now as I'm a child of God and formed in His image, but at the time that's how I was raised, knowing that. So when I see a police officer in my rearview mirror, my instant thought is there's a fear that rises up in me, because I don't know what he can do to me. I don't know. It's on the other end, he has a gun, I don't. He's definitely fearful because of what's happened in the history of what's with us, but I don't have a gun, and sadly he or police officers have been shot on the other end too. So there's a sense of fear there, that there's a tension that we feel because of history, sadly, to when that happens. I know that. So for instance, my father, the first encounter I had with this was growing up. After the divorce, he would come pick us up, and I remember driving back on the highway one night, and the police officer, I was asleep, and I was like 12 years old, and he pulled us over, and he's shining the light in the car, and I was mad. I'm like, why is he, man, I'm asleep. And he's shining the light in the car, and my father's a big guy. I don't know if you know him. He's not quiet, he's loud, and not always respectful either. But he's sitting there with his hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, and he's shaking a little bit. And I'd never seen this before. And the police officer writes him a ticket, and I started laughing because I'm like, you got a ticket. And he's like, and in that moment, he got very upset. And for the whole ride home, he just kind of talked to me about why he was holding onto the wheel, how compliant he has to be with the officer, how he needs to be respectful. And for me, it marked me because that was one of the first encounters I had with that, and I was like 12 years old. A year later, I'm riding to one of my AAU basketball games with my cousin Rod, who's here today, and we're driving in the middle of Brownsburg. So if you're from Brownsburg, I'm sorry, I'm gonna tell you about this story. But Brownsburg at the time there wasn't a whole lot of African Americans in Brownsburg, so we're driving through Brownsburg, and we know about this, Brownsburg, Indiana, that is, and we was just going to a game, and my cousin was driving my grandfather's old Skylark, Buick Skylark. This is a loud car you can hear from a mile away, and he just put a new stereo system in it, and my friends were in the back seat tearing his old one up. I don't know why, we're 12 years old. It doesn't make any sense. But we're tearing his old system up, and he swerved a little bit, and the police officer just happened to drive by and did a U-turn, pulled us over, and he's asking us all types of questions. My cousin, the same thing happens, put his hand on the wheel. He tells everybody to be quiet, and he's very respectful and compliant towards the officer. And I remember what happened with my father. And the police officer looks in the back, says, whose radio is that? And he's like, that's my old radio, they're just tearing it up. He's like, get out the car. He makes us all get out the car because this radio. And he takes us, he puts I think he was in cuffs, and he took all of us, my 3 friends and myself, out into the field and started questioning us. And about 4 of the police cars pulled up. And we were out there for over an hour and a half just getting questioned and harassed for no reason. What happened? Why are you out here? What are you doing with that radio? Why would we steal a radio and then tear it up? It makes no sense. And then finally let us go. No ticket, no citation, nothing. And we sat in that car for the rest of the ride quiet. I cried at my basketball game because I didn't get to play, and I didn't know how to really deal with the emotions that I was feeling at this young age, where I had this encounter with this white police officer, or many white police officers at the time. And that's just one instance. And we call it DWB now, driving while black. So it's one of those things that, serious, like when you're driving, you just kind of feel that tension as a black male for sure, driving a car.
Well, I wanted you to answer first because I thought maybe you had mentioned fear. Because here's why. When I see a patrol car in the rearview mirror, and especially the lights come on, I feel fear too, but it's different. It's about dang, I don't want a ticket because I don't want to spend money.
Yeah.
It's about my pocketbook.
Right.
And so it's a whole different sort of fear, and the fear you described is he has a gun and I don't. I've never thought that. And so I think that is a good way to just talk about some of the differences of our experience. Is like we both live in the same place. We both might get pulled over by an officer. I haven't been pulled over by an officer, I don't think, since 1998 or something like that.
Man, what's that like?
In the United States. Now, Mexico's a different story, which, I did have in much of Latin America, in the developing world, there are more corrupt police forces often, not always. And so that's a different story. But if I'm talking about the United States, I don't want to get pulled over, but it's not the same level. It doesn't have the same depth and like resonance, and like I'm fearful for what might happen to me. It's more like, dang, I hope I don't get a ticket. And in that illustrates, I think, and you help me, correct me if I'm off base here, I think it illustrates a bit of an ongoing difference between our everyday experiences, right? Is that like when you get pulled over by a police officer, race is a thing. And I'm not thinking about race at all. It's like not even in my consciousness in that kind of an experience. And I think that probably happens a lot of times with lots of different experiences. Like if you walk into a business meeting and it's a bunch of white dudes in suits, I don't want to ask too leading of a question. Is that different for you than walking into a business meeting with your old friends from high school?
It's totally different. I think, and to that point, because of, it doesn't even have to be a room full of white guys. It could be a room full of African Americans. If I walk into a room full of folks, because it's not necessarily leading with it's not a level of distrust. It's just, I don't know these folks and I don't know what they want from me. So there's too much in my history and even just history in the past. So they see a brother who is educated, master's degree, great family, and it's the whole notion of guys making it out the hood and not wanting to go back or not wanting to give back to their city. It's always somebody that necessarily kind of wants something. So I don't know what you want from me when I walk into the room. So there is certain hats that I put on. There are certain hats that I put on when I walk in the room to be something for that. And it's not acting. It's just I've learned how to do that because I've had to do it on a day-to-day basis in our culture. So it is learning to be minority in majority culture. So it's to navigate though. It's the dance, we call it. You kind of dance in between rooms and different things of that nature. You're learning to do that. So it is that.
Yeah.
But I would say, to that point, it's like, you can talk about this a little bit more because it's maybe the level of privilege even in that. So I don't have to think about I have to think about my skin color on a day-to-day. I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror. I know I'm a black male. I know when I walk out the door, my wife's like, look, let me look at what you got on, make sure you're cool, because that hat on your head may give off the wrong connotation or anything. So it's just certain things that I have to think about because of the color of my skin. And I'm not a little black guy either. I'm a big black male. So it doesn't matter what I have at the end of the day on or who I am or my degrees or anything. It just, I have to think about my color.
I think you use the word, it's a buzzword right now, privilege.
Yep.
I think that what you're describing is a great way to talk about privilege because it's a word that's kind of been hijacked and become overly argumentative sometimes. It's a way occasionally for the social justice warrior type person to like be judgmental to other people and other people to feel defensive. But the way you're describing privilege is that there's one less significant thing for me to think about on a daily basis with daily transactions than there is for you. And that's a position that's privileged, comparatively privileged. And that's a good, like, practical way to think about it without, you mentioned you have a master's degree. That's awesome. So if we talk about privilege in a lot of times whenever people think of privilege, they're like, but he has a master's degree and I don't. Or they live in a nice house and or they, whatever. Whoever the they is, and we make comparative comparisons about material possessions or something like that, then the whole conversation gets very confused. But if we talk about what your daily experience is, that I get to go through life and like not think about what that I'm white, and whenever you go through lots of transactions every day or everyday things, you do have to go through that filter. Am I like on track, basically?
Yeah, with everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to sum up and summarize what it means whenever people say, in the best sense, what privilege means on an ethnic basis or class kind of basis. I'm going to kind of shift gears a bit. Can you describe a relationship, a person, maybe early on that helped you that was a bridge person for you between races or just helped to teach you, helped to bring you along?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Definitely, man. I'll never forget this guy. So about the same time that all of this was happening, it's like God really had his hand on my life because it could have went the whole other way when all of these different racial tensions, even with the law enforcement I was talking about, started to rise. Because about the same time, I started playing football, 12 years old, and I was playing football in the Catholic Youth League, and my coach was a white guy from the whole other sides of the track. Grew up in a great family. They had money, and he drove a golf cart to practice. It was just like that's how he got to practice. And we would scrimmage. We would practice on Butler University's campus, and my grandmother lived down the street, so my family knew his family. I didn't know him. I just moved to Indianapolis, but my mother hooked it up where I was riding home with him in his golf cart every day after practice to get dropped off at my grandma's house. It was weird, but we rode in the golf cart through the city streets and got to my grandmother's house, and he would drop me off. But we're in this little golf cart, so it was pretty intimate. We got to spend a lot of time together, and his name is AJ. And AJ at the time had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, and I didn't know that at the time, and neither did I care.
How old were you, roughly?
I was like 12 years old, and but he would care for me like no one else had done. He was a mentor that I needed in my time. But he's a white guy so the first time we started riding in that golf cart, I didn't say much to him. I didn't know him. He had to pull it out of me, and we started talking. He would feed me, take care of me. Before practice or after practice, he formed the AAU basketball team around me and put all my friends on the team, and just would tell me to shoot. So I'd get like 30 to 40 points every game, and he'd get mad at me if I didn't shoot the ball. He was one of the main reasons I got into the high school that I went to. His brother was the athletic director, and I went there for free. He's been pulling for me ever since we met, and we didn't talk about race all the time, but here's a brother that looked totally different to me, and we didn't have a whole lot in common, and he just cared for me like none other at a very young age. So and it really formed kind of just my outlook on the world and other people that were different than me.
Great.
Yeah. How about you, man? How has that changed, or even maybe it's a relationship with me or other people that, like, what has that been for you? What's a relationship that's been pretty formative
Yeah, I mean,
in your life?
relationships for me, you are definitely one now that is helpful for me. Some of you guys have met some of the people that have been in our church. We used to have a couple here, Julius and Miriam.
Yeah.
Julius was another friend of mine that was very helpful and patient with me on helping to teach me things of race. And then I think some of my first like encounters with that as a kid had to do with international travel. So when I was 11, I went to Haiti for a couple of weeks, and with my parents, who, like I mentioned, my dad's a pastor, and we worked in and around Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and that just like blew my, as an 11-year-old, just blew my worldview open, that there's like this other world that's, whatever it is, 80 miles from Florida,
Yeah.
and it looks so different. But it was more like, for me at the time, less about race per se, and more about people are different generally, and the world looks different in different places. And then when I was 14, I went on another trip with our church, a couple weeks in Russia, just shortly, like in the months after the Iron Curtain fell. So it was an interesting time to be there. And again, to sort of wake up to the differences between ethnic lines and language lines and all kinds of stuff. And that they're not just differences, they also mean that the world view is different. It becomes like perceptions of how things work are different.
Yeah, man.
And so that, I think of those two trips as a kid, and then later, after graduating from college, moving to Mexico City, I had a few friends. One I'll name, Sergio, really helped me as a colleague, as a peer, as a friend, to navigate some of what ethnic differences mean in real life. And he's married to an American, so he's very savvy, like a bridge person, cross-cultural, just even in his marriage. So he was helpful to me and to Lindsay. And I think I'm still in progress, though. I'm like still totally, still in process figuring stuff out. But yeah, definitely depends on friendships, different relationships, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, because we've both kind of had the unique experience to be able to have those relationships and those experiences with people outside of our own ethnicity, which, I mean, sadly, that's not a common thing. I mean, people don't have those type of relationships, nor are they having conversations like this. Or my perspective was changed at 12, and it's still an ongoing perspective to where that's changing continually, where we're able to dive into each other's cultures. And I wish somebody would say something about AJ. We'd have a problem. It's just, that's just the kind of relationship we have, and it's the same thing for myself, and the same thing we have now too. But that didn't, like I said, it was quiet in the golf cart, and there's many tears that we have had to share because of that too, starting out. So, but it's very integral to growth as a person too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think whenever you're getting to know somebody that's from a different background, particularly if the background is ethnically different or linguistically different or racially different, those tend to be more profound differences sometimes than we take things for granted. And so those conversations initially can feel really clunky or sometimes offensive, or sometimes like when we're talking, you're crying all the time and I'm not.
Come on now. It seems like we don't even want to go there with each other, so we don't address the not us, but naturally you don't want to address that conversation with each other. So it's the thought I have of you, or the presupposition I have of you already, that stops me from being able to talk to you. So it keeps us from even engaging, and now we point fingers at one another and get on social media and hate each other. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yeah. You mentioned social media. I am both simultaneously encouraged by some things that are happening now. I'm going to flip this question right back at you. I see an energy and a passion, particularly from young people now, that's very encouraging to me about mercy issues and justice issues and racial reconciliation issues. But I see a disconnect because this is also the generation that is caring about this in a big way is also the generation that spends so much of their communication via the internet, right? Via social media. So if I was to humbly offer like a bit of a corrective, it would be to take the passion and the energy about mercy issues and stop applying them long distance via the internet and start applying them incarnationally. I'm borrowing that word from Christianity, like Jesus became in the flesh a human for us. Start applying them contextually where you live and where you are.
Yeah,
I don't know. So taking into account social media, that's a great thing to talk about in all of the frankly vitriol that's out there. What do you say with social media and race right now? It might even be a good way to kind of wrap up. Give us hope.
For social media's attention for me, I'm kind of frustrated with social media in a lot of ways. Some of you all probably heard me rant about it last week. It's just, social media is a great tool in terms of platform, being able to use it for good. And I loved having Facebook when it first came out, and I could talk to friends I hadn't seen in years. That was pretty cool. But now it's turned into a place where we literally are thugs in a lot of ways. We beat people down with our words. And I call it social media soldiers. We stand up for everything, even though we probably don't care about it in the light of day, or you wouldn't be able to see in our normal lives. And what happens is now we get in arguments over social media, which makes no sense to me. How you gonna argue with somebody on social media when they can think 5 minutes in between that's not even fair. I mean, it doesn't that's not a right dialogue. You can't have a conversation over social media and argue about things where you can research on the spot. And but it's all that to say is that social media has become a tool in a way that it hasn't been useful sometimes. And then the media we get news. We get hit in every single way, which we've never had that in our lives before, which leaves a lot of people, I think, overwhelmed and depressed too, because they don't know what to do with all of the knowledge and things that are coming their way. And we live in a city like Chicago where it's very progressive, and we know a lot of things that are happening before other little cities and towns outside of this, and we use social media, we post different things. And I'm not saying we shouldn't express ourselves, but what happens is we may post things on social media as if we're more conscious or we're better than other people, and it causes people to feel outcasts or feel like they can't actually meet with you or have a conversation with you because of what you're putting on social media. And the thing about it is, maybe 6 months before then, you weren't even that conscious. You didn't even know all this stuff. Now you're actually the black nationalist, and you're great on social media, and you're the white person that knows everything about social injustice and all this. And it's like, well, that's not where you came from. So how do we, like you said, be like Jesus and take what we're learning and be incarnational with our families, with our friends, and help them actually understand maybe what we understand. And social media is not always the best platform for that. It's a good platform, but make sure we're living what we're saying, and we're able to give it or feed it to people in a way that they're able to eat, and we're able to go forward together. And with that, the hopeful thing about it is that we have access to matters of race and injustice that we've never had before. So there's things that have come to the light that we've never seen or didn't know about that were going on. And somebody in the first service was telling me that in their 47 years of living, they feel like racial tensions have been higher than ever before. And it's not necessarily that this is new. It's not new. This has been here for years. But what's happening is as people are getting more knowledge, and they're getting hit from it from many different angles, because they can't necessarily just not pay attention to it. They have to pay attention to it. And the hopeful part about that is that now the church can actually step in the gap and be what we've been called to be as Jesus's ambassadors and representatives of the faith, to where we can do what Jesus did in this text, and we can go out and we can share the gospel with people no matter the color of their skin, and no matter where they come from, no matter if there's a racial hatred or we're enemies, but we can go out and we can share with them and be who he's called us to be. so we can take what we're learning and we can go out and share amongst a people. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be the president who changes everything, or the new president in 8 or 4 years. It's none of those. It's not government. It's not more money. Our hope has to be in Jesus, who creates lasting change. So we've seen all these things come to the forefront in media, and it's now, what do we do with that? So it's having conversations like we're doing right now. It's, what is your dinner table? Asking what does the dinner table at your house look like at night? Is it the same people? Do they look like your same color of skin? Do they do the same type of jobs you do? What are you doing to be proactive and engage in the culture now? Or are you just learning this stuff and then getting on social media or some platform, or not necessarily engaging yourself in the culture like Jesus does? I mean, the disciples have been hanging with him for a couple of years now, right. And they're rolling with him, and they don't want to say anything to this woman. So it's like, what are we doing to immerse ourselves in the culture to engage people and point them to the cross? Because that's what Jesus calls us to do. So let's not be the church that we were in the 50s, 60s, and 40s in the civil rights movement, where the evangelical Christian church stood on the sideline while Martin Luther King was out on the front lines getting shot by water hoses, standing up for his right. Let's not be that church. Let's be the church that we're called to be, to engage these issues and break down the walls of division by the power of the gospel. Yeah. That's the hope. And I'm hopeful because the church, we can't avoid it now. Mm-hmm. Social media, news, it's all over the place. You can't avoid it. You are choosing willfully to stand on the sidelines now if you don't step in and engage. And that's where I want us to be hopeful. And with that, I'll segue to us, because we're about to do communion, but that's the hope for our church too. It's also the fear for our church too, because we could learn, if you look around, if you take a second and look around this room and look at everybody here in the church, I mean, everybody, we look different. We're from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities. We have different stories. But the fear is that it stops here inside these four walls we call our church. And we don't take it outside these walls and share it with people. Or we don't actually do it in a practical way. So I'm not asking you to go out and march and stand on the front lines and stand outside the police station. I'm asking you to change your dinner table at nighttime. I mean, I'm asking you to go out to get coffee with somebody that's different than you. Get to know somebody like that. Invite them over your house, or go to their wherever they go and just hang out with them. Get to know them a little bit and get to know their story. Dive into their story. Get to know their culture for them. Empathize with them so you feel them. But by knowing them now, you love them in a way where you're able to have compassion and you're compelled to do something for them, for their good. So it's getting to know them. That's what the gospel looks like. That's what Jesus is doing here. It's intentional ministry where he steps in. He doesn't just share himself, but he steps into tensions, and we see walls fall down, division, walls that are divided them for 700 plus years. They're falling down because Jesus stepped in. And that's what he calls us to be and do as the church. So the hopeful side of that is that we take what we learn here out into the streets of Chicago, out into the nation, and out into the world that needs hope, that needs to know Jesus. And in the midst of all this division, we're the light. We're the one that brings people together. Amen?